And as I wrote the book, I was really like 2/3 of the way through before I realized the more interesting lying, or like the less overt lying, and therefore more interesting to me, um, is the lying that Jane does. And it's not just self-deception. I mean, it's not just a book about the way that a woman can convince herself that it's not that bad, that her marriage is not doomed. Oh,
How old is Fritzy, Sheila?
8 weeks.
Oh my god.
oh.
He is
You're
so
not reading. Pick up a book. Alright, this is going to be a nap session.
Hi friends, I wanted to hop on here and start the vlog because I haven't actually spoken to you guys yet in this video. I've just been doing stuff, reading, and trying to remember to film, but not always succeeding with that. Yesterday, me and almost all of my best friends went out to dinner to celebrate my birthday, and it was a lot of fun. We went to the same restaurant that I went to with my parents and my sister last weekend, and we had the same waiter, and he was so sweet and like ended up remembering me and my sister since we had already been there, and it was just a lot of fun. We had some good drinks and we were playing songs on touch tunes. I do have a slight headache this morning though, so I'm trying to ward that off because I'm going to an amusement park with one of my other friends who moved to Florida and is up here visiting, so that's gonna be a lot of fun. It's gonna be really hot out, but I'm excited because I love a roller coaster. I do have the Snoopy mug and the Snoopy PJ set, and I received many Snoopy themed birthday gifts, which is hilarious to me. I absolutely love it. Birthday book haul, The Philosophy of Snoopy. This is so cute. It's just like little drawings and like comic strips of Snoopy, and I love it. I'm so happy. I did get other books as well. Claire very kindly gave me Saving Agnes by Rachel Cusk, which is like one of the last couple ones that I need. And then she gave me 2 Annie or No books as well. Shame and I Will Write to Avenge My People. And I also got a book for my friend Allison as well. I have been reading Second Place by Rachel Cusk, which is like the whole point of this video. I have a bunch of like notes and thoughts and stuff written down that I'll get into later. I don't feel like doing all that right now, but I do want to say I'm on page 125. I think there's like 180 pages in this, and I'm enjoying this so much more this time around, which is really exciting because this is one of the books that I chose to reread because I didn't love it that much whenever I first read it. So it wasn't that I like actively disliked it or anything. I feel like usually if I give a book a lower rating, it's not that I like hated it, it's just that I finish it and I'm like, okay. Like, thanks girl, what's next, you know? I am feeling just like more compelled on this reread of this book, and I think because I've spent so much time this year thinking about Rachel Cusk and her work, I feel like my brain is just like in a better place to understand what she's doing with this. There are like different kind of themes and ideas that came up in Parade that I remember kind of picking apart that are also showing up in here. So I feel like I can really kind of see how she started to lay the groundwork for Parade with Second Place. And it's just been really cool to pick those things out and just get like a deeper appreciation for this book. So I'll get more into my thoughts later on whenever I have my laptop open and can look at my notes. But yeah, I flew through a ton of this yesterday. I'm finishing it a lot quicker than I was expecting to. I thought it was going to take me a while to read, but it's not. So yeah, I think I'll finish it maybe tonight, depending on when we get back from riding roller coasters. If not tonight, then probably tomorrow. So yeah. Hi friends, I finished my reread of Second Place by Rachel Cusk yesterday. I feel like I did a really bad job of introducing this video and kind of explaining what was going on whenever I filmed my little clip yesterday morning. So if you haven't seen, I made a video a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago at this point, talking about how I wanted to incorporate more rereading into my reading routine. So I chose 6 books, 3 that I loved and 3 that I felt kind of iffy on, and I decided that I would read one of those each month for the rest of 2024. And Second Place was one of the ones that I had felt iffy about, and I decided to pick it up as the first book in this little like project. I initially read it in May of 2023, and I think I rated it 3 stars, and I just remember not feeling super enthusiastic about it whenever I read it the first time. And Rachel Cusk is one of my favorite authors, if not my favorite, so I figured I should revisit it and see if I could get anything more out of it. And I'm very happy to say that I did. I actually enjoyed this so much more this time around. I wish I would have filmed some more like of my real-time thoughts, but I read most of this while I was like laying in bed about to fall asleep, so I didn't feel like talking to the camera then. But I did write down a lot of my thoughts, and I organized all of those thoughts into a little review, and I have a bunch of quotes and just things about the themes in here that I wanted to talk about. So I figured that we would do that and kind of wrap up my first reread diary, if that's what we're gonna call it. I kind of like that as a name. So yeah, let's talk about Second Place. So I've been working my way through Rachel Cusk's catalog of books over the last couple of years, and one of the things that I've really enjoyed about doing that, and this is something that I talk about in my Rachel Cusk author spotlight video, but I've really enjoyed just kind of picking out these recurring themes that she has in her work and connecting all of her works together and just kind of following the threads that she is weaving throughout all of her books. So in between my first read of this and my second read of it, I read 4 more of Rachel Cusk's books, and I also had a chance to do some like reading and research on her life and the way that her work has been received over the years, and I feel like both of those things really helped me to appreciate this book more this time around. If you don't know, this book is about a woman. Her name is M. Rachel Cusk really has a thing for using one letter as a person's name. So we have M, who is our narrator. She is middle-aged and remarried. She has a daughter who I think is like 21 years old, and she has this second place on the property that she lives on. So it's like another little house, and she invites different like artists and writers and people to stay there and to create while they stay there. So she decides to invite L, who is an artist that she really admires. She had an experience with his work where she saw it while she was kind of going through a hard time in Paris, and she just felt really seen by it and just really felt connected to it. So she decides to write to him and invite him to stay in the second place, and he accepts, but things of course don't go the way that she wanted them to, and we really see the narrators kind of struggle with trying to keep control of a situation that
is really out of her hands. So yeah, I've really been like immersed in the Cusk universe recently. I read her new book, Parade, at the end of May and then again at the beginning of June. So I was doing a lot of thinking about the themes and the ideas that she brings up in that book. And I think that all of that Parade reading really made those same themes jump out at me in second place, because she is looking at a lot of similar ideas in this one. And these are things that I hadn't really picked up on my first read through. I wasn't as attentive as a reader back then, and now I was able to just really appreciate what she was doing with the story. So this book is really exploring the way that gender intersects with a couple of different issues and topics. I have them kind of laid out with some different quotes for each of them and just my thoughts on what she's doing with those. So it looks at how gender intersects with violence and control, which was a really big thing in Parade as well as freedom and this feeling of like invisibility. And there are also some really great passages talking about motherhood and mother-daughter relationships in here that I feel like I kind of overlooked upon my first reading of it, but really like stuck out to me this time around. So one of the big things that Cusk is exploring in this book is this like motif of violence, which sometimes is physical and like truly violent. Sometimes it's more of like a metaphorical, impactful thing that happens to you that she's considering to be violence. She is looking at how fragile and precarious our lives are and how these acts of violence or these certain things that happen can really just completely rock our worlds. And she did that with Parade, with the stuntman story in there, and I feel like second place really laid the groundwork for that. There's often this sense in this book and in Parade of this like doubling of the self in order to deal with these violent and traumatic events. And there is a quote in here that says, "From that moment, I ceased to be immersed in the story of my own life and became distinct from it." And I kind of drew some parallels between M seeing Elle's paintings for the first time. She stumbles across a sign for a gallery and wanders into it, and it's an exhibition of his work, and she just feels so affected by those paintings. So that was kind of an act of violence, and it was almost similar to the attack in the street from Parade to me, because both of those incidents kind of caused the narrator to have this like other self that starts to take on the difficulties of life. There's just like this separation that comes about as a result of both of those events. The language in this book can sometimes be quite violent as well, which I always feel is really interesting with Rachel Cusk. There's a metaphor about some soldiers in here, and she's talking about how they built their lives up only to go off to war and have all of that destroyed. And she says, "All that sweet cultivating and building, all that possession, to be chopped apart with a sword, stamped out in the seconds it takes to stamp on an ant." So even her descriptions of things are very violent and visceral. There's kind of an overlap in these themes of violence and freedom as well. At one point in the book, the narrator finds out that Elle, the artist, is wanting to kind of destroy her and break her will in a sense. He thinks that she is always trying to make things happen, and it really doesn't sit right with him. Maybe because she's a woman, he's a man, you know, there's kind of that friction between them. But the narrator, in a sense, wants to be destroyed and leave behind her past self. She had some things go on in her past. You can tell that she's been through some things, and she really wants something to happen to kind of be able to leave that past self behind, and she sees the artist staying with her as the perfect way to do so. And on the subject of freedom too, there's a lot of exploration here of what it's like to be in control of a situation, how to keep control of your emotions when things are not going your way, And like I said, just the will that the narrator has to try and change things and make things go the way that she wants them to. One of the big disappointments for her in the book is that her and the artist don't get along. He's very cold towards her. He wants to destroy her. You know, she invited him to the second place because she really admired his work and really felt like they would have this connection and this understanding between them that's just not there. And we see her try to grasp at any little thing that she can to change that. I think that the question of freedom is where a lot of the gender roles start to come into play as well. The artist has kind of lived his life being able to create art and do what he wants. He's not weighed down by like a family or anything like that, whereas our narrator has a family. She has a daughter, and her relationship with her daughter's father was not very good, and she just kind of feels like she is unable to do anything. She talks a lot about how she has all of this free time and she just kind of sits around and does nothing. So she's just feeling very stuck. And whenever she first saw Elle's paintings, she saw something in them that really spoke to her wanting freedom. Whenever she first saw them, you know, she was in the midst of this bad relationship and trying to take care of her child, and something in them just really spoke to her and called to her. It almost made me think, to bring up Parade again, another kind of parallel for me, it made me think in the first story about how there was the male painter G, and he started painting upside down, and his wife felt like he was really getting at something about the female experience, where things kind of look correct in a way, but really it's all flipped over and on its head and not right. And I think it's interesting how Cusk juxtaposes these male artists with females looking at the paintings and connecting with them, and just like the male and female dichotomy there. The narrator says at one point, talking about Elle, did he understand that by parading his freedom and the fulfillment of his desires in front of me, he was making me less free and less fulfilled than I had been before I walked in the door? I don't have any thoughts written down about that quote, but I just felt like it was kind of like a pillar of the book, and just really indicative of their relationship with each other. We also do kind of see this reversal of Elle's freedom at the end of the book. I won't spoil what exactly happens to him, but he goes through something and he tries to get his freedom back, but it is eventually what leads to his demise. So just kind of interesting to see how he took control once again, and then bad things happen because of it. Another thing that the narrator really struggles with in this book is this feeling of like invisibility and inferiority. She talks about how she's always been criticized since she was a young girl, and she says, if you've always been criticized, it becomes more or less impossible to locate yourself in the time or space before the criticism was made. To believe, in other words, that you yourself exist. The criticism is more real than you are. It seems, in fact, to have created you. And I wonder if some of her writing about this feeling of criticism and not being seen is due to the reception of some of her previous books. I go into this a little bit more in my Rachel Cusk author spotlight video, but she wrote Aftermath, which is a like memoir essay collection about her divorce, and the critical reception to that, like, people tore her apart for it. They didn't like that she was being so raw and honest about her experience with her divorce, and that was really the catalyst that made her write the Outline trilogy and caused this shift in her writing style where she really doesn't put too much of herself into her books anymore. A lot of her earlier work was very personal and very honest and almost autofictional, and she kind of stopped doing that in a way. Kind of obscures any details about her characters' lives. And I think that she did that because she had to figure out how to like write about these themes without opening herself up to that really intense scrutiny that she faced. So she did so by becoming very opaque as a narrator. One of the big things that is an issue with her and Elle getting along is he says that he can't see her, which is really interesting. Elle brings along a younger woman with him to stay in the second place. He doesn't let anyone know that he's doing this. She just shows up with him, and they both really just kind of either ignore the narrator, or when they are interacting with her, they're making these ridiculous demands of her, and they're not really understanding why that's disrespectful to her and why she doesn't want to do the things that they're asking her to do. You just see kind of all of the characters that are surrounding the narrator. They all have their own things going on. You know, her husband is working to take care of the property that they own. It's set on this marsh, and he has to do a lot of physical work out on the land. And he's also just a man of few words. And then she has her daughter, who befriends the young woman that comes to the second place with Elle and kind of is beginning to blossom into her own person. And her daughter's boyfriend is also there. He's kind of a weirdo. He is trying to become a writer as well, but he ends up just kind of plagiarizing a book that he read already. But he has his kind of focus. He shuts himself in the office and works on that book. Elle is creating art and just kind of keeping to himself and not really talking to her. So she just feels very distanced from everyone and everything, and she feels invisible. And I think that happens for women a lot too as they age and take care of their families, and just kind of give their lives to other people. They feel like they're not seen and they don't really have this place in the world. So I feel like she's kind of getting at some of those ideas with that as well. And then the last theme that I wanted to talk about with this is motherhood. So the narrator has a daughter, Justine. Like I said, she's 21 in the book, and she had been abroad for a little bit, and her and the narrator kind of have a fraught relationship at some points. They were separated for a year in Justine's childhood because her father kind of took her away and would not let the narrator see her daughter. And now that Justine is becoming a young woman and just kind of growing into herself, there's some friction and just some really interesting ideas that I thought that Cusk brought up. One of the things that she talks about in here is kind of this self-sacrificing that mothers do. She talks about how she has these feelings of both guilt and this feeling of not wanting to have something taken from her, and how those feelings always kind of come to her at the same time. And she talks about how, as soon as she was kind of out of her childhood, along comes her own child, and she kind of has to give up her place in the sun, I think is what she says, in order for Justine to thrive. Another thing that she talks about is the way that parents don't truly know their children, and that they can only kind of guess at how their children will turn out whenever they're young, because there are things that children will hide from their parents. So parents will kind of only get this very basic version of the child. And she talks about how guessing how the child's going to turn out is kind of just this fun game that people play to pass the time, because you really don't know how someone is going to end up. She says, talking about Justine, there she stood, the externalization of my life force, immune to further alterations, and there was I, unable to explain to her how exactly she had turned out the way she had. She also asks this question of, what are a parent's duties to their child? What are a child's duties to their parents? And I really liked the answer that she gave to Justine when Justine asked her what the narrator's obligations were to Justine. And the narrator says, I think that I'm supposed to take care of you and help you grow enough to be able to go out on your own, but if you're unable to go out on your own, then I'm obligated to take care of you for the rest of your life, which I thought was a very just thought-provoking way to put it. There's always this kind of push and pull with the narrator and Justine and this feeling of the outside world being dangerous, and the narrator really not wanting Justine to go out into that world, while also wanting her to be self-sufficient and take care of herself. And while there's that fear, there's also this like kind of complicated feeling where she feels as though her daughter is overtaking her. You know, Justine kind of has this burgeoning sense of freedom. The narrator really sees her as a young woman and sees her as a complete person. Justine starts to distance herself from her boyfriend, and it really brings back a lot of memories of the narrator and her relationship with Justine's father and the way she let herself be kind of ruined by him. She has those same fears for Justine. So yeah, I don't know if any of that like was coherent, but I just wanted to talk about some of those quotes and some of those ideas. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the writing style in this, because I feel like that was a really big surprise for me as well. I feel like whenever I thought back to this book, I remembered the writing style as being really sparse, and it is in some sense. It can be very stripped back, but this time around, I actually found this to be like way more descriptive than I remembered. I thought that the characters were really vivid, especially the character of Tony, which is funny because he's kind of quiet, but just the way that the narrator is describing him, you can really get the sense of what kind of person he is. He's very like dignified, he doesn't play games with people, and he's very protective over the things and the people that he loves, and he just kind of seems like almost like a statue to me in a way. Just very like firm and unchanging in his character. I also think that Cusk is really good at describing like landscapes and settings, and I feel like we don't talk about that enough. Whenever she's talking about the marsh or the second place like building house thing that the narrator has on the marsh, the descriptions of it were just like very beautiful. There's also a scene towards the end of the book where the narrator and Justine are swimming in a lake at night, and just the descriptions of everything were really wonderful. The other thing with this book is that it's addressed to the narrator's friend Jeffers, so it's written almost as like a letter, and there are kind of these asides to Jeffers every so often, and I think that it allowed for some humor to show through with Cusk and just a little bit more of like personality in the writing style, which I was kind of confused about why it was written like that when I first read it, but I found it really enjoyable this time around. She makes these little like side comments to Jeffers and these little jokes, and I enjoyed that aspect a lot. So yeah, I am really glad that I reread this. I bumped my rating of this up to 4 stars from 3 stars because I just feel like I understood so much more and I enjoyed my reading experience a lot more. So I'm really glad that I decided to do this, and this was such a great way to kick off my reread diaries, because it just really, I think, shows the value of rereading, and it shows how much your opinions can change depending on, you know, where you are. So yeah, that is Second Place by Rachel Cusk. I wouldn't recommend this as like an entry point into Cusk, but I think once you have a few under your belt, you'll be able to appreciate this one a lot more. So yeah, that is all I have to say on that. Let me know if you've read this, what your thoughts are on it. I would love to discuss in the comments, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!